The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William sat at the breakfast table, staring at the plate before him. The kitchen staff had prepared what they considered a traditional English breakfast, complete with black pudding, but the future king pushed the dark sausage to one side of his plate without taking a single bite. This simple gesture, witnessed by only a few palace staff members, would become one of many food-related quirks that defined the Prince of Wales throughout his life. William's relationship with food had always been complicated, shaped by a childhood that was anything but ordinary. Growing up in the royal household meant that every meal was carefully planned, every ingredient scrutinized, and every dining experience conducted under the watchful eyes of staff, security, and, often, the public. Unlike other children who might discover their food preferences through trial and error, William's tastes were formed within the rigid structure of royal protocol and family tradition. The young prince's earliest memories of food were intertwined with memories of his mother, Princess Diana. She had been the one to break royal tradition by taking her sons to McDonald's, introducing them to the simple pleasure of a hamburger and fries eaten in a car rather than at a formal dining table. These moments of normalcy were precious to William, and they shaped his understanding that food could be about more than just sustenance or ceremony. It could be about connection, rebellion, and finding moments of authenticity in an otherwise heavily controlled life. But even these attempts at normalcy came with their own complications. Diana's struggles with bulimia had created an atmosphere around food that was charged with emotion and uncertainty. Young William observed his mother's complex relationship with eating, noting how she would sometimes push food around her plate without actually consuming it, or how she would excuse herself from family meals. These early observations planted seeds of anxiety about food that would follow William throughout his life, making him acutely aware of the psychological and emotional weight that meals could carry. The death of his mother when William was just 15 years old fundamentally altered his relationship with food in ways that would take years to fully understand. Grief manifested itself in his eating habits as he found himself unable to stomach certain foods that reminded him of Diana. The smell of her favorite perfume mixed with the memory of shared meals created associations that made eating a minefield of emotional triggers. Palace staff noticed that the young prince began to eat less, picking at his food and showing little interest in the elaborate meals that were prepared for the royal family. It was during this period that William's aversion to certain foods became more pronounced. Spicy foods, which he had never particularly enjoyed, became completely intolerable. The heat seemed to amplify his emotional state, making him feel overwhelmed and out of control. Kitchen staff learned to prepare bland, simple meals when William was struggling, understanding instinctively that food needed to be a source of comfort rather than stimulation during his darkest moments. The royal family's approach to dealing with William's changing eating habits revealed much about their understanding of grief and mental health. There were no dramatic interventions or forced meals, but rather a quiet accommodation of his needs. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, who had weathered her own share of family tragedies, understood the importance of allowing grief to manifest in whatever way felt natural. She instructed the kitchen staff to always have simple alternatives available when William couldn't face the formal dining room fare. His father, then, Prince Charles, took a different approach, encouraging William to maintain some semblance of normalcy by participating in family meals even if he didn't eat much. Charles believed that the ritual of gathering for meals was important for family cohesion, especially during difficult times. This led to many awkward dinners where William would sit at the table, moving food around his plate while trying to engage in conversation about anything other than his obvious lack of appetite. William's time at Eton College provided a different kind of food education. Away from the careful oversight of palace staff, he was exposed to institutional dining that was far removed from the gourmet meals of his childhood. The boarding school's approach to food was functional rather than ceremonial, and this suited William's evolving preferences. He gravitated toward simple, recognizable foods: roast beef, mashed potatoes, basic vegetables prepared without elaborate sauces or exotic spices. It was at Eton that William's classmates first began to notice his peculiar eating habits. He would carefully examine his food before eating, separating different components on his plate and eating them in a specific order. His aversion to foods with mixed textures became apparent as he consistently avoided dishes like shepherd's pie or casseroles where ingredients were combined in ways that made them difficult to identify and separate. The psychological reasons behind these behaviors were complex and rooted in his need for control during a period when so much of his life felt chaotic and unpredictable. Food became one of the few areas where William could exercise complete autonomy, making choices based purely on his own preferences rather than royal protocol or public expectations. His careful examination of meals was a form of self-protection, ensuring that he wouldn't encounter any unwelcome surprises that might trigger difficult emotions or memories. His rejection of black pudding, that traditional British delicacy made from pig's blood, became one of his most well-known food aversions. The very idea of eating something made from blood seemed to revolt him on a visceral level. Palace chefs learned to prepare alternative breakfast items when black pudding was on the menu, understanding that this was not a matter of simple preference but something deeper and more fundamental to William's psychological well-being. The texture aversions extended to other foods as well. Oysters, with their slimy consistency and briny taste, were completely off-limits. The idea of swallowing something that was still technically alive seemed to disturb William in a way that went beyond typical squeamishness. Staff members who witnessed his reaction to being offered oysters at formal events described his visible discomfort, noting how he would politely decline while seeming genuinely distressed by their presence on his plate. These food aversions were not merely matters of taste but were deeply connected to William's developing sense of identity and his struggle to find authenticity within the constraints of royal life. Each rejected food represented a small act of rebellion, a way of asserting his individual preferences in a world where his choices were often made for him. The kitchen staff, many of whom had worked for the royal family for decades, understood this implicitly and worked to accommodate his needs without making a spectacle of his limitations. The contrast between William's food preferences and those of his younger brother Harry became another source of complexity in family meals. Harry, perhaps because he was less burdened by the weight of future kingship, maintained a more adventurous approach to food throughout their childhood and adolescence. He would enthusiastically try new dishes and showed none of William's careful examination and separation of food components. This difference sometimes created tension at family meals, with Harry's ease around food serving as an unspoken reminder of William's ongoing struggles. Palace staff learned to navigate these family dynamics carefully, ensuring that meals could accommodate both brothers' very different needs and preferences. This often meant preparing multiple versions of the same dish, one simple and unadorned for William, another more adventurous for Harry. The additional work was never questioned by the kitchen staff, who understood that food was about much more than nutrition for these grieving young men. As William entered his late teens, his food preferences began to stabilize around a core group of familiar, comforting dishes. Roast chicken became a particular favorite, especially when prepared simply with minimal seasoning. The predictability of this dish, combined with its association with Sunday family dinners from his childhood, made it a safe choice that rarely triggered difficult emotions or memories. Kitchen staff noted that William would visibly relax when he saw roast chicken on the menu, knowing that he could eat without anxiety or careful examination. Vegetables were approached with similar caution. William gravitated towards simple preparations: steamed broccoli, roasted carrots, plain green beans. Anything served with complex sauces or unfamiliar seasonings was viewed with suspicion. This preference for simplicity frustrated some of the palace's more ambitious chefs, who had trained at elite culinary institutions and were eager to showcase their skills. However, they learned to find satisfaction in perfecting these simple dishes, understanding that their role was to nourish and comfort rather than to impress with culinary innovations. The social implications of William's food preferences became more apparent as he entered adulthood and began attending more formal dinners and state functions. Diplomatic meals, in particular, posed challenges as refusing traditional dishes from visiting dignitaries could be interpreted as cultural insensitivity. Palace protocol officers worked closely with kitchen staff to develop strategies for these situations, often ensuring that William had familiar alternatives available while still showing respect for visiting cuisines. These diplomatic dining experiences taught William the importance of separating personal preferences from public duty. He learned to take small, polite bites of foods that made him uncomfortable, understanding that his role as a representative of the British monarchy sometimes required personal sacrifice. However, the stress of these occasions was evident to those who knew him well, and palace staff worked to minimize such situations whenever possible without compromising diplomatic relationships. The evolution of William's relationship with food during these formative years established patterns that would continue throughout his adult life. His preferences were not merely about taste but were deeply connected to his psychological well-being, his need for control, and his ongoing process of grief and healing. Understanding these connections would be crucial for anyone seeking to comprehend the man who would one day become king, and the complex emotional landscape that shaped his approach to even the most basic human needs. The University of St. Andrews represented a turning point in William's relationship with food, though not in the way many might have expected. For the first time in his life, the future king found himself in an environment where his eating habits were not constantly monitored by palace staff or governed by royal protocol. The freedom was both liberating and overwhelming, as William discovered that making his own food choices required a level of self-awareness he was still developing. Living in student accommodation meant that William had to confront his food preferences in new ways. The communal kitchen in his residence hall became a laboratory of sorts, where he experimented with preparing simple meals that aligned with his established tastes. His flatmates observed his meticulous approach to cooking, noting how he would carefully read every ingredient label and prepare each component of his meal separately before combining them in predictable ways. It was during his university years that William's aversion to garlic became most apparent. The pungent bulb, beloved by many of his peers who used it liberally in their student cooking, would send William retreating from the communal kitchen. The smell alone was enough to trigger a physical reaction. His appetite would disappear completely, and he would often skip meals rather than eat in a space that had been permeated by garlic's distinctive aroma. This aversion puzzled his friends, who couldn't understand how someone could have such a strong reaction to what they considered a basic cooking ingredient. What they didn't realize was that garlic's powerful scent had become associated in William's mind with elaborate royal dinners during some of the most difficult periods of his adolescence. The smell transported him back to formal dining rooms where he had struggled to maintain composure while grieving his mother's death, making it impossible for him to approach the ingredient with anything resembling neutrality. His relationship with seafood also became more complex during this period. While he had always been cautious around fish, university life exposed him to a wider variety of seafood preparations that highlighted his specific aversions. Salmon, surprisingly, became one of the few fish he could tolerate, but only when prepared in very specific ways. The fish had to be grilled or baked simply, without any sauces or marinades that might mask its natural flavor. The predictability of properly prepared salmon, its firm texture and mild taste, made it one of the few proteins that William could approach with confidence. However, any fish served whole, with head and eyes intact, was completely unacceptable to William. The visual reminder of the creature's former life created a psychological barrier that he couldn't overcome. University friends who witnessed his reaction to whole fish described his immediate physical recoil, followed by a complete loss of appetite that could last for hours. This reaction went far beyond typical squeamishness and seemed to tap into deeper anxieties about mortality and vulnerability that were never far from William's consciousness. The social dynamics of university dining presented new challenges that palace life had never prepared William for. Group meals with friends required him to navigate his food preferences while trying to maintain the casual, approachable image he had cultivated among his peers. This often meant accepting dinner invitations to restaurants that served cuisines he found difficult to navigate, leading to awkward situations where he would order the plainest items available or claim he wasn't hungry rather than explain his complex relationship with food. His friends gradually began to notice patterns in William's dining choices that went beyond simple preference. He consistently avoided restaurants that specialized in ethnic cuisines, particularly those featuring spicy or heavily seasoned dishes. Indian restaurants were particularly problematic, as the complex spice blends and unfamiliar ingredients created an overwhelming sensory experience that left William feeling anxious and disoriented. The heat from chili peppers seemed to amplify his emotional state in ways that made him feel vulnerable and exposed. Italian restaurants presented their own set of challenges, primarily due to William's complicated relationship with tomatoes. While he could tolerate small amounts of tomato in simple preparations, the rich, acidic sauces that formed the foundation of many Italian dishes were completely unacceptable to him. The acidity seemed to trigger a physical discomfort that went beyond taste preference, creating a burning sensation that he found genuinely distressing. This aversion to tomato-based sauces meant that William's options at Italian restaurants were severely limited. He would typically order plain pasta with olive oil or simple grilled chicken, choices that his friends initially attributed to a desire to maintain his athletic physique but which were actually driven by his need to avoid foods that caused him psychological or physical discomfort. The discovery of William's preferences around pasta became a source of gentle teasing among his university friends. His insistence on plain preparations, pasta with butter or olive oil, never with complex sauces, seemed almost childlike to his peers who had embraced the sophisticated palates that university life was supposed to cultivate. However, those closest to William began to understand that these weren't merely immature preferences but deeply ingrained needs that served important psychological functions. His approach to vegetables during his university years revealed another layer of his complex relationship with food. While he maintained his preference for simply prepared vegetables, William began to show an increased interest in organic and locally sourced produce. This wasn't driven by environmental consciousness, as many assumed, but rather by his need to understand exactly where his food came from and how it had been prepared. The uncertainty around conventionally grown produce, the possibility of unknown chemicals or processing methods, created anxiety that organic certification helped to alleviate. This need for transparency and control extended to his meat consumption as well. William began to show a strong preference for meat from sources he could trust, often choosing dishes made from ingredients that came from royal estates where he could be certain of their origin and preparation. This wasn't about supporting the family business but about managing his anxiety around food safety and quality in an environment where he couldn't rely on palace staff to ensure that everything met his exacting standards. The psychological roots of these preferences became clearer as William entered into his first serious relationship with Kate Middleton. The early stages of their courtship involved numerous dinner dates and social meals that highlighted his food-related anxieties in new ways. Kate's initial confusion about William's dietary restrictions led to several uncomfortable situations where she had chosen restaurants or prepared meals that he couldn't eat, forcing him to explain his limitations in ways that felt deeply personal and vulnerable. Kate's response to learning about William's food preferences would prove to be crucial to their relationship's development. Rather than dismissing his needs as unreasonable or trying to expand his culinary horizons through gentle pressure, she approached his restrictions with genuine curiosity and acceptance. This non-judgmental attitude created a safe space where William felt comfortable explaining the emotional and psychological factors that drove his food choices. Through conversations with Kate, William began to articulate connections between his food preferences and his emotional state that he had never fully acknowledged before. He recognized that his need for simple, predictable foods was linked to his desire for stability in other areas of his life. The chaos and unpredictability that had characterized his adolescence had created a need for control that manifested most clearly in his relationship with food. Kate's cooking became an opportunity for William to explore his relationship with food in a supportive environment. She learned to prepare the simple dishes he preferred while gradually introducing minor variations that helped him expand his comfort zone without triggering anxiety. This process was slow and careful, with Kate paying close attention to William's reactions and respecting his boundaries even when they seemed arbitrary to others. The couple's early domestic life revealed new aspects of William's food-related behaviors. His need to inspect ingredients before cooking, his preference for preparing meals himself rather than accepting food prepared by others, and his ritual of eating different foods in specific orders all became more apparent in the intimate setting of their shared meals. Kate observed these behaviors without judgment, understanding instinctively that they served important psychological functions for William. His aversion to surprise in food became particularly evident during this period. William needed to know exactly what he was eating and how it had been prepared. This meant that meals with complex sauces or mixed dishes were approached with extreme caution, and anything that contained ingredients he couldn't immediately identify was typically rejected outright. This need for transparency wasn't about being difficult or demanding but about maintaining a sense of control that was essential to his psychological well-being. The contrast between William's careful, controlled approach to food and Kate's more relaxed attitude created opportunities for growth and understanding. Kate's family meals were informal affairs where dishes were shared and ingredients were mixed freely, creating an atmosphere that was initially challenging for William but which gradually became associated with warmth and acceptance. Through careful exposure to this different approach to dining, William began to understand that food could be about more than just avoiding discomfort, it could also be about connection and joy. However, certain boundaries remained firmly in place throughout this period. William's rejection of shellfish became absolute during his university years, extending beyond his earlier aversion to oysters to include all crustaceans and mollusks. The combination of unfamiliar textures, strong flavors, and potential allergen concerns created a perfect storm of anxiety that made these foods completely unacceptable regardless of preparation or social context. His response to being offered shellfish in social situations revealed the depth of his discomfort. Rather than simply declining politely, William would often become visibly agitated, his entire demeanor shifting in ways that were noticeable to those around him. This reaction went far beyond simple food preference and suggested deeper psychological associations that made encounters with these foods genuinely distressing rather than merely inconvenient. Marriage to Kate brought new dimensions to William's relationship with food, as he found himself navigating the complexities of family meals that extended beyond his own immediate needs and preferences. The Middleton family's approach to dining was refreshingly informal compared to the rigid protocols of royal meals, yet this casualness presented its own challenges for someone whose food anxieties had developed within highly structured environments. Kate's mother, Carol, initially struggled to understand William's dietary restrictions, interpreting them as royal pretensions rather than genuine psychological needs. Her well-intentioned attempts to prepare elaborate meals for family gatherings often resulted in uncomfortable situations where William would eat very little, leading to hurt feelings and misunderstandings that took time to resolve. The breakthrough came when Kate privately explained the deeper reasons behind William's food preferences, helping her family understand that these weren't matters of snobbery but genuine psychological necessities. The shift in the Middleton family's approach to accommodating William's needs marked a significant moment in his personal development. For the first time since childhood, he found himself in a family environment where his food preferences were accepted without question or judgment. This acceptance allowed William to relax his vigilance around meals in ways that had seemed impossible during his adolescent and university years. Carol's adaptation to cooking for William became a labor of love that strengthened their relationship considerably. She learned to prepare simple, elegant meals that satisfied his need for predictability while still feeling special and thoughtfully prepared. Her roast chicken became legendary among family members for its perfect balance of familiar flavors and careful presentation, representing everything that William found comforting about food without any of the anxiety-inducing elements that troubled him in other dining situations. The birth of Prince George in 2013 introduced new complexities to William's relationship with food, as he grappled with his role in shaping his son's eating habits. His own traumatic associations with food created anxiety about passing on unhealthy relationships with eating to the next generation. William found himself caught between his desire to protect George from the anxieties that had shaped his own food experiences and his recognition that some level of caution around food safety and preparation was necessary for a member of the royal family. Kate's approach to feeding their children became a source of both comfort and concern for William. Her relaxed attitude toward letting the children explore different foods and textures was admirable, but it also triggered William's own anxieties about control and safety. He watched nervously as George enthusiastically grabbed handfuls of food, mixing different items together and eating with the messy abandon that characterized normal childhood development. This tension led to many discussions between William and Kate about how to handle family meals. William's instinct was to carefully control what the children ate, ensuring that everything was simple, safe, and predictable. Kate, drawing on her own childhood experiences, advocated for allowing the children to develop their own relationships with food through exploration and experimentation. Finding a balance between these approaches required ongoing negotiation and compromise. The introduction of solid foods to their children became particularly challenging for William. His aversion to mixed textures and complex flavors made it difficult for him to participate in feeding sessions where pureed foods often contained multiple ingredients blended together. The sight of George enthusiastically eating vegetable purees that combined flavors William couldn't tolerate created a disconnect that was both touching and troubling to witness. Kate's patience during this period was remarkable, as she found ways to include William in feeding routines while respecting his limitations. She would prepare simple, single-ingredient purees when William was participating in meals, allowing him to engage with the children's eating experiences without triggering his own food anxieties. This thoughtful accommodation strengthened their partnership while ensuring that the children didn't absorb any negative associations with food from their father's struggles. The challenge of state dinners and formal entertaining became more complex after William's marriage, as he was expected to host elaborate meals for foreign dignitaries and government officials. These events required careful coordination between palace staff and Kate to ensure that William could fulfill his hosting duties while managing his own dietary needs. The solution often involved strategic menu planning that included dishes William could eat alongside more adventurous options for guests. Kate's presence at these formal dinners provided crucial support, as she could engage with guests about the more exotic dishes while William focused on the simpler preparations he could tolerate. This division of labor allowed both of them to contribute to the success of these important diplomatic events while acknowledging William's limitations without drawing attention to them. The evolution of William's cooking skills during his married years revealed new aspects of his relationship with food. With Kate's encouragement, he began to take more active role in meal preparation, finding that having control over the cooking process helped alleviate some of his anxieties about food safety and ingredient transparency. His repertoire remained limited to simple preparations, but his confidence in the kitchen grew significantly as he learned to create meals that met his exacting standards. His signature dishes became family favorites not because of their complexity but because of the care and attention he brought to their preparation. William's scrambled eggs, prepared slowly and methodically with just butter and cream, became a weekend tradition that the children looked forward to. His approach to cooking reflected his approach to food more generally: careful, controlled, and focused on achieving perfect results within a narrow range of acceptable variations. The influence of royal chefs on William's evolving palate during this period was subtle but significant. Professional kitchen staff learned to work within his restrictions while gradually introducing minor variations that helped expand his comfort zone. A trusted chef might add a single herb to a familiar dish, or prepare a vegetable in a slightly different way, always with William's knowledge and consent. These small experiments helped him develop new tolerances while respecting his need for control and predictability. However, certain foods remained absolutely off-limits regardless of preparation or context. William's rejection of foie gras became particularly notable during formal dinners where this delicacy was traditionally served. His objection wasn't based primarily on ethical concerns about animal welfare, though he was certainly aware of these issues, but rather on the rich, fatty texture that overwhelmed his palate and triggered physical discomfort. The preparation of foie gras, with its intense flavor and luxurious reputation, represented everything that William found problematic about elaborate cuisine. The disconnect between the food's prestigious status and his genuine physical aversion to it highlighted the difference between his public role and his private needs. Palace staff learned to always provide alternative first courses when foie gras was on the menu, understanding that this wasn't a matter of preference but of genuine physical incompatibility. His aversion to blue cheese developed into another absolute boundary during this period. The strong, pungent flavors and unusual textures of aged blue cheeses created reactions that were both physical and psychological. William described the experience of encountering blue cheese as overwhelming, with the intense flavors creating a sensory overload that could affect his ability to taste other foods for the remainder of a meal. This reaction to strong cheeses extended beyond blue varieties to include any cheese with particularly intense or unusual flavors. William gravitated toward mild, familiar cheeses like cheddar and brie, appreciating their predictable tastes and smooth textures. Cheese boards at formal events were carefully arranged to include options he could enjoy while still providing variety for guests who preferred more adventurous selections. The psychological component of William's food aversions became more apparent as he entered his 30s and began to reflect on the patterns that had shaped his eating habits. Conversations with Kate helped him recognize that many of his strongest aversions were connected to specific memories or associations rather than purely to taste or texture preferences. This awareness didn't necessarily change his food choices, but it did help him approach his limitations with greater self-compassion and understanding. His rejection of game meats, despite their traditional importance in royal cuisine, revealed another layer of his complex relationship with food. While hunting remained an important part of royal tradition and William participated in shoots on royal estates, he found himself increasingly unable to eat the results of these activities. The connection between the living animals he encountered during hunts and the meat served at subsequent meals created a psychological barrier that was impossible to overcome. This aversion to game meats created some awkward situations during traditional royal celebrations where dishes like venison and pheasant were centerpieces of the meal. William learned to navigate these events by taking small portions and moving them around his plate while focusing on the social aspects of the gathering rather than the culinary offerings. His ability to maintain conversations and fulfill his social obligations while essentially not eating demonstrated the sophisticated coping mechanisms he had developed over years of managing his food-related challenges. The birth of Princess Charlotte in 2015 and Prince Louis in 2018 brought renewed focus to family meal dynamics and William's role in shaping his children's relationships with food. His growing awareness of his own food-related anxieties made him determined to provide his children with positive associations around eating, even when this meant pushing himself beyond his own comfort zones. Kate's influence was crucial in helping William find ways to be present for family meals without transmitting his own anxieties to the children. She encouraged him to focus on the social aspects of dining rather than the specific foods being served, helping him understand that his presence and engagement mattered more than his actual food consumption. This shift in perspective allowed William to be more relaxed during family meals, creating a positive atmosphere that benefited everyone at the table. The transition from Duke of Cambridge to Prince of Wales brought new responsibilities that forced William to confront his food preferences in increasingly public ways. State visits and diplomatic functions became more frequent, each one requiring him to navigate complex culinary traditions while maintaining his role as a gracious host and representative of the British monarchy. The weight of these expectations created new pressures around food that went beyond his personal comfort zones. During a particularly memorable state dinner for the President of France, William found himself faced with a menu that included escargot as the first course. The sight of the snails, glistening with garlic butter and herbs, triggered an immediate physical reaction that he struggled to conceal from the assembled dignitaries. His face went pale, and Kate, seated beside him, noticed his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. The moment passed without incident, as William had learned to manage these reactions through years of practice, but the internal struggle was intense. Kate's intervention during that dinner became a template for how she would continue to support William through challenging food situations. Without drawing attention to his distress, she engaged the French president in conversation about the preparation of the dish, allowing William time to compose himself while deflecting attention from his untouched plate. Her smooth handling of the situation demonstrated the deep understanding of his needs that had developed over their years together. The expansion of their family's official duties meant that the children were increasingly included in formal meals and public dining events. William watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety as George, Charlotte, and Louis navigated these situations with ease, their natural curiosity about food contrasting sharply with his own careful approaches to eating. The children's willingness to try new foods during public appearances created both opportunities and challenges for William, who wanted to support their adventurous spirits while managing his own limitations. A particularly poignant moment occurred during a charity event focused on food security and nutrition education. William was scheduled to participate in a cooking demonstration with local children, teaching them to prepare simple, healthy meals. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. Here he was, someone with significant food-related anxieties, being asked to model positive relationships with food for young people who might be developing their own eating habits. The preparation for this event required extensive planning and practice, as William worked with charity organizers to develop a menu that would be both educational for the children and manageable for him personally. They settled on a simple pasta dish with fresh vegetables, ingredients that William could handle confidently while still demonstrating important cooking techniques and nutritional principles. During the actual event, William's genuine care for the children overcame his personal food anxieties in remarkable ways. His interactions with young participants who had their own dietary restrictions and preferences helped him recognize that food challenges were more common than he had realized. A young girl who couldn't tolerate certain textures due to sensory processing issues reminded him of his own childhood struggles, creating a connection that transcended his usual self-consciousness about his eating habits. The success of this event marked a turning point in William's understanding of his role as an advocate for healthy eating and food security. His personal struggles with food, rather than being obstacles to his public work, actually provided him with unique insights into the psychological and emotional factors that influence eating behaviors. This realization allowed him to approach future food-related events with greater confidence and authenticity. His ongoing aversion to spicy foods became a diplomatic challenge during visits to countries where highly seasoned cuisine was central to cultural identity. A state visit to India required particularly careful navigation, as traditional Indian hospitality involved sharing elaborate meals featuring complex spice blends and intense flavors. The advance team worked closely with local officials to ensure that milder alternatives would be available without causing offense to their hosts. William's approach to these diplomatic dining challenges evolved to focus on cultural exchange and appreciation rather than actual food consumption. He learned to engage enthusiastically with the stories and traditions behind various dishes, asking thoughtful questions about preparation methods and cultural significance while taking only small, ceremonial bites of foods that were too challenging for him to actually eat. This strategy proved particularly effective during a visit to a spice market in Delhi, where vendors were eager to share samples of their products with the visiting prince. William's genuine interest in the cultural and economic importance of the spice trade, combined with his honest explanation that his palate wasn't suited to very spicy foods, created warm interactions that honored the local culture while respecting his personal limitations. The children's influence on William's relationship with food became increasingly apparent as they entered their school years and began forming their own food preferences. George's enthusiasm for trying new foods during school lunch programs contrasted sharply with William's careful approaches to eating, creating opportunities for father-son conversations about different ways of experiencing food. These discussions revealed William's growing sophistication in understanding his own food-related behaviors. He was able to explain to George that people have different relationships with food based on their experiences and sensitivities, helping his son understand that food preferences aren't just about taste but can be connected to emotions, memories, and individual physical responses. This nuanced explanation helped George develop empathy while avoiding the transmission of food-related anxieties. Charlotte's particular interest in cooking created new opportunities for William to engage with food preparation in low-pressure environments. Her enthusiasm for helping in the kitchen encouraged him to participate in family cooking activities more frequently, leading to the discovery that he could enjoy food-related activities when they were focused on creativity and family bonding rather than his own consumption. The establishment of the Prince William Award for young people working in sustainable agriculture brought new dimensions to his understanding of food systems and nutrition. Meeting with young farmers and food innovators exposed him to conversations about food that went beyond personal consumption to encompass environmental stewardship, social justice, and economic sustainability. These interactions helped William develop a more holistic understanding of food that reduced his focus on personal anxieties while increasing his appreciation for the broader significance of what we eat and how it's produced. Young entrepreneurs working on plant-based alternatives to traditional meat products particularly captured his attention, as their innovations offered solutions that aligned with both environmental concerns and his own preferences for simple, predictable food sources. His involvement in food security initiatives revealed how his personal experiences with food could translate into meaningful advocacy work. His understanding of food anxiety, developed through personal experience, allowed him to connect authentically with families struggling with food insecurity and children dealing with eating disorders. This connection transformed what had once been a source of personal struggle into a foundation for compassionate public service. The planning of George's future coronation banquet, still decades away but requiring early consideration, became an opportunity for William to influence royal food traditions in ways that reflected changing attitudes toward dining and hospitality. His advocacy for simpler, more sustainable menu options reflected both his personal preferences and his growing awareness of contemporary food issues. Working with royal chefs and event planners, William began developing concepts for future state occasions that would honor tradition while acknowledging modern realities about food production, environmental impact, and dietary diversity. His vision for these events emphasized quality over complexity, sustainability over ostentation, and inclusivity over exclusivity. The evolution of William's relationship with wine and alcohol during his role as Prince of Wales revealed another dimension of his careful approach to consumption. His preference for simple, traditional wines over complex or exotic varieties reflected the same need for predictability that characterized his food choices. He gravitated toward classic English wines and well-known French varietals, avoiding anything with unusual flavors or unconventional production methods. This conservative approach to wine selection served him well in diplomatic contexts, where his choices needed to complement rather than compete with the elaborate cuisines being served. His knowledge of wine traditions and production methods, developed through careful study rather than adventurous tasting, allowed him to engage knowledgeably in conversations about wine without pushing his own comfort boundaries. The establishment of sustainable food production initiatives on royal estates became one of William's most successful integrations of personal interests with public responsibility. His preference for knowing exactly where his food came from and how it was produced translated naturally into advocacy for local food systems and sustainable agriculture practices. These initiatives allowed William to model positive relationships with food that emphasized quality, sustainability, and transparency rather than exotic variety or culinary adventure. The success of these programs demonstrated that his personal approach to food, when properly channeled, could contribute meaningfully to broader conversations about nutrition, sustainability, and food security. As William approached his 40s, his relationship with food had evolved from a source of personal struggle into a foundation for authentic public service. His understanding of food anxiety, developed through years of personal experience, allowed him to connect with others facing similar challenges while advocating for approaches to food that emphasized nourishment, sustainability, and emotional well-being over mere culinary sophistication. The journey from a grieving teenager who could barely eat at family dinners to a confident advocate for food security and sustainable agriculture represented one of William's most significant personal achievements. His ability to transform personal limitations into sources of empathy and understanding had created new possibilities for meaningful work that honored both his individual needs and his public responsibilities. His food preferences, once seen as obstacles to his royal duties, had become integral to his authentic engagement with contemporary issues around nutrition, sustainability, and food justice. The careful approach to eating that had once isolated him from normal social interactions now provided him with unique insights into the complex relationships between food, emotion, and social connection that shaped modern dining experiences. The future promised new challenges and opportunities as William prepared for eventual kingship, but his evolution in relationship to food provided a template for approaching other personal struggles with patience, understanding, and the recognition that individual limitations could, when properly understood and channeled, become sources of strength and authentic connection with others facing similar challenges.